Well, welcome back, everyone, to the next edition of the DFS Down Under Show. Finals, week one. Pound the Cats, Friday night footy, $90,000 Draftstar contest. We're looking so much to the actual contest itself, but as I bring in Tristan Heffernan, the Big F, the main guru of the DFS Down Under Show, it is looking like one of the most hardest AFL single contest DFS slates known to man. Welcome to you. How are you this evening?
Good, Smatho. Great to see the entree to the weekend's footy with a couple of finals down here in Tassie. Fortunately, they've picked the wrong end of the state to play them in, but this should get us warmed up for them anyway. Like you say, it's just a nasty, nasty match. The Power and the Cats. We do have a game to go on, and that last game made no sense at all. So good luck to us here, Smatho, and good luck to everyone on this slate because this is going to be a real tricky one.
Now, also, we are live streaming the DFS Down Under Show. So do you have any comments or questions throughout the stream? Chuck them in the Facebook or the YouTube chat. Chuck them in. We'll answer those throughout the stream. For those of guys who are watching on the replay, either on Friday, give us a like, send some comments in, send some feedback in, because obviously this is going to be a quite difficult slate. We'll go through all the four positions very shortly there for us. So now, before we get started, obviously there's a $90,000 contests for Draftstars, and I'm just going to drop a little bit of mail there on Draftstar socials. Just look out for some future content in terms of our $100,000 live final winner. I will be, well, hopefully by this time this weekend, I will be catching up with Tommy's Guns to present his live belt and his $100,000 check. So make sure you check out Draftstar socials. Hopefully next week we'll produce a little video for that. So looking forward to getting over to our friends there over in Western Australia. There, Hef. I'm not sure you knew that.
No, I didn't know that was coming. But yeah, you talk about the 100,000, but the belt, everyone loves the belt.
I love the belt. I haven't got the belt in my possession though, so hopefully it's been on a truck apparently all the way through the Nullarbor over to Western Australia. So hopefully it's there when I arrive this weekend.
Armour guard, for sure.
Yes, the old armour guard. All right, let's not muck around. Let's get straight into this particular slate. It's a It's a $90,000 Draftstars pool. The Power and the Cats. Friday night. We're over in Adelaide. 7:50 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time start. Currently, the Power are favourites at $1.70. The line's 5.5, and the total is a little paltry 149.5. I thought, is there any weather issues in Adelaide? There is none whatsoever. It's a sunny day into a cool evening, maybe a bit of breeze about, but that 149.5 indicates that this game is going to be a bit of a grind on the scoreboard. In team news, we knew Port always come out with their news early, so they announced that Orazio Fantasia is back. Mitch Georgiadis has done his hamstring, and Sammy Mays has been omitted, but he'll likely be the medical sub again. For the Cats, Mitch Duncan is back with his knee injury, so look, not sure he's quite 100%, but the Cats have picked him to play. Max Holmes comes out of the side, and obviously Sean Higgins was the mini sub again last week. He can't get a full game. So obviously not much team news to go on there, Hef, but obviously a bit of a like-to-like in those team news today.
Absolutely, yeah. Ford replaces a Ford for the Power, and Max Holmes has looked a bit like a young Mitch Duncan, hasn't he? So pretty similar there. Interesting that they haven't found a spot for Higgins when they've got Sammy Simpson off a half-forward flank. I thought maybe that was a move they might make, but like you say, Mays will probably be the sub. It wouldn't be surprising if Higgins was the sub as well.
All right, and let's move on to the DFR tools that are always available on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Every week, free resource for your preview, your cheat sheets, and all your data tools that you need for your AFL Daily Fantasy. And here are my notes from this week. And unfortunately, have not much to go on here because both teams are bottom of the league for fantasy scores against, and they're one of the top of the league for fantasy points scored. Both teams in their last 5 have allowed the same fantasy scores averages to Ruckman, and the Cats are number 1 for uncontested possessions, and the Power is number 1 for contested possessions. So we can go back to round 12 that you've already mentioned, Sam, but you can't really take too much of a notice of that because 3 of the Geelong forwards cracked the ton and no one else. But what are your thoughts in terms of from a data point of view, from points against, all the tools that we have here on DFR?
I think the most interesting part of that, Smatho, was just the differences in style. Port's always playing a very contested brand. They've always come up there in those contested numbers. If the points they give up tend to be to the contested players, because that's just the style of footy they play, so there's more of it on offer. And obviously Geelong, we know how much they love to possess the ball in the back half, which Port are generally pretty good at cutting down, and Geelong are really good at cutting down on the opposition. So bit of a clash of two styles. Like you say, we had round 12 or round 13, I think it was. Interesting,
13, 14?
Yeah, 203 points. We've got the total there under 150 tomorrow night, but they did go over 200 early in the year, which is interesting. I remember we did this game actually on the show. It was Thursday night footy, and we talked about how hard it was for forwards to score against both of these two teams. And then, yeah, the three forwards for Geelong came out. There was Rowan, there was Cameron, there was Hawkins, and they all turned up. And then Connor Rozee had a 98 after kicking 4 first quarter goals and finishing with 5. So obviously the data isn't always right. I think looking at the scores from that last game is going to – it's hard to go off one game and say, oh, well, that's just going to happen again. But it is definitely going to play into ownerships, I think. So definitely something you've got to consider in the back of your mind. But this is tough. You're going to earn your money if you win this one.
Okay. Well, let's get stuck into this $90,000 contest here on Draftstars. 7:50 p.m. start, as I did allude to earlier. So also we did cover Port Adelaide last week on the show, and obviously we are covering them again. So this time in the Rucks, Scotty Lycett at 12,370 did come through for the Ruckman last week. Peter Labbins didn't do much at 11,730. And then also we talked about Tommy English. We thought he was a great play, but ended up staying in the goal square. That did really help us all. So this week we get Reece Stanley, who is at 11,380. Look, again, we can throw a blanket over them. It's $1,000 each between the three of them. Also, if you're looking at box scores in form, you would assume that Scotty Lycett will gain most of the ownership. Peter Laddams will probably get the least amount of ownership, although he is forward available. And then Reece Stanley off his. What did he score last year? He did score 80 and back-to-back tons before that. It could be a bit more people going towards Stanley out of the three of them. So anything you can give us here, Hef, that could make your decision a bit more easier?
Well, first of all, I'm definitely got Laddams in at number 3. I think we've just seen he did have a big spike, but it was a game where Lycett hurt himself against Carlton. That's the reason for that 110 there. So he got a pretty good look at it. It was an absolute flogging. He played quite well last week against the Dogs, took a couple of marks and kicked a couple of goals and still only had the 50. Lycett's clearly the number one option, and Geelong's not really a team where I'd be expecting Laddams to bob up in the forward line and score a ton of points. So I've got him clearly 3. I think the other 2 is a really good discussion. Stanley saving $1,000 might actually be really helpful on this slate. There's not a whole lot of good cheap options. So I almost think Stanley might come up as the highest owned here. You see that 80 off the back of 2 tons. If you dig in a bit deeper, there's a ton there against GWS, which was coming up against Kieran Briggs. So I reckon any half-decent ruckman could probably score a ton against an inexperienced ruckman like Briggs. He did have the 100 against St Kilda, his old mob. And then the 80 last week up against Melbourne with Max Gawn is definitely pretty a reasonable effort. We know how hard it is to score against Big Maxi Gawn. And is there a bit of a sting in the tail for Reece Stanley after he just got totally lost in that last play of the game, Smatho?
Yes.
No doubt he would have had a bit of constructive feedback, I reckon, from the coaching staff. So he might be determined to make amends. I'm going to go Stanley on top here over Lycett, just by way of opportunity. You'll probably get more time in the ruck. We know Blixarves chops him out. Interestingly, last time these two teams played, Laddams went against Blixarves, so we can't take too much from that. Last season, Lycett only had the 47. Stanley only had the 60, but if that was to happen again, Stanley would be a massive win. So Stanley 1, Lice at 2, Laddams 3 for me.
Okay. Cool. Let's move on to defence. And just like last week, we got many options from Port Adelaide again. They haven't really budged in price. Some went really well. Trent McKenzie comes to mind. Some were fine. So, again, we've got plenty of options here from Port Adelaide. Now, obviously, there's still no Tommy Stewart for Geelong. So, obviously, Lockie Henderson had quite a big game there last week. Back-to-back, nearly let's call it a tongue with 96 there. So, these players are comparatively priced. The tools say that, they restrict scoring down the back end here. So, are we looking to save a bit of money, or should we try to attack a couple of mid-price value plays here?
Look, it's probably there is a school of thought you could probably save as much money as you can here in the backs because there's not a whole lot of cheap stuff to go around. Sometimes finals can be funny things. Geelong are more likely to try and chip it around the back line than Port, in my opinion here. Last time these two teams played, there was not really much love at all for either of the backs. I don't think any of them went above 80, actually. Interesting point you make with Henderson. His last month's been actually really good. Has racked up the marks, that 116 there against Melbourne. He had 15 marks, 11 marks against Carlton. He gets a lot of the cheap stuff that Tommy Stewart's not there to pick up. So while you sort of look at that 11,000 price and think, oh, geez, that's the highest Henderson would have been in a while. Without Stewart in the team, that ceiling's definitely there. And you can't say that for a whole lot of these players, I don't think.
Does Henderson have a key position match up against Dixon, or will he be more floating in that Stewart role?
I'm guessing he's probably a bit more floating. I think they'll use Blixarves on Dixon, depending on how much they want to get Blixarves up around the ruck. But I think they'll go with Stanley the majority of the time. The one thing is if you are picking up Dixon, you're probably getting a pretty good look at it the other way when you have got possession because Big Dicko's not known for his defensive pressure, I'm sure. I can't really tip you into many of these. I think they're all pretty well exposed, and I think they're all pretty well priced right too. You sort of look down the bottom end, the likes of Jonas, O'Connor, Kolajasny, and think, oh, well, if these guys could get me to a 50 or 60, I can save some cash. Some sobering looking at the last game, though, when these two teams played. O'Connor had a 41, Kolajasny had a 31, Atkins had a 33, Lockie Henderson actually had a 21. Tommy Jonas had a 22. Like there's some... You think these guys are cheap and they can't ruin your lineups, and then you look at some of those numbers from last time they played and you just think, wow.
Well, they still ruined them.
They did. So, yeah, Ali is maybe one we can talk about. He was all right last time these guys played with a 70-odd. He's been in super form at the right time of the year. He got himself a little mention in the All-Australian squad. Even then, you look there, you see a couple of 30s and a 20 going back through there. So I don't think there's any safe plays here by any stretch. Yeah, this is hard, Smatho.
It is hard. I was going to mention about Jack Henry. Looking pretty consistent there. His last month, nothing below 66 there. Has that almost intercepting kind of mark kind of play. Just floating around there. So obviously there's a lot of marks there. Kicks and tackles and things like that. So I'm going to back Jack in due to the fact that obviously if Dixon is tied up, he'd probably be like on a Rosie or possibly for Todd Marshall kind of thing. So, and as you said, they're not exactly back up the ground defensive kind of weapons. So I'm going to back Jack Henry in. I would love to spend up one of these guys, such as like Trent McKenzie, who had 100 last week, taking all the kick-ins. Dan Houston seems to be very consistent as well, but we need a safe salary on this particular slate, as you'll see in the mids coming up. So I will come back down here and probably back in your call with Alia at 9,320, and hopefully he gets along some contested possessions across the back line.
I don't mind Henry there because the only angle we sort of have is that Stewart hole in the defence. Someone does have to fill that, and we talked about Henderson. Henry's probably the other guy who does sort of fit the mould. So potentially he's a tad underpriced still. as they catch up to that role. But yeah, Houston was probably, if I was looking for the safest option, I'd probably go Dan Houston. He's we know, especially if they end up trying to push an extra guy into the contest, Houston's often that guy. He's sub 11K. You look at those scores, you'd think most times he's going to go 70 plus. So if you want to play it safe, he'd be top of my list, Houston.
I might actually chuck him in the midfield.
Yeah.
That could be because considering if you look below him, there's not many guys under him. Because look at, they're all the same price there. So if we look at the mids there, my notes here for the Cats, look, Duncan is back. But is he 100% to go? That's probably the question you'll need to find out if you want to do some digging through your sources and things like that. But he can rack it up in a hurry if the Cats are allowed to play their game style with uncontested possessions. He's at 15,480. Ollie Wines is up there at the top there at 16,950. Great scoring in his last pretty much all season long. He has that ability to go huge with that 150. Look, I'm not sure they'll get to the heights in a final, but stranger things have happened in finals. As we scroll through down the page, as you'll see, the lack of value is quite evident with Mark Blixar's the second least expensive guy at $10,000, and then Mark O'Connor, that I reckon a few guys will be pushing in at 8,310. So, look, both teams are great midfield. We have to talk about the uncontested style versus the contested style. Who's it going to suit in a final here, Hef? We're probably going to get one or two guys at best here. So take it away.
He's expensive, but I love Wines. We've talked all year about Geelong giving up the points to the big midfielder, and he is the big midfielder, Ollie Wines. He top scored last time these two teams played. He's pretty expensive. It's going to be hard to get him into teams, but I think if you can, he's the safest banking of points we have here. Cam Guthrie, you know how much I love the Guth Pig. Look at those scores, just unbelievable. So he's at 15.5. He actually seems pretty well priced to me, Guthrie. So they're the two that everyone's going to love, and for good reason. They're the obvious two. If we're trying to go a little bit cheaper, a lot of these guys are pretty well priced up. The likes of Menegola up to 13,000 that's not a price that I like playing Menegola. I prefer him around the 11,000 when he's down at the tip playing against a bit of second-rate opposition. I'm not so sure I want to be spending up nearly 14,000 on him. I much prefer to go the likes of Travis Boak, who's had a ripper season. I don't really know who snubbed him for all odds, whether it was his own team, because they didn't nominate him, which just makes the whole thing makes no sense at all to me. Why do you have to nominate these guys who pick the team? Have to be told who they're picking from. It's just unbelievable.
Well, back in my old days when I was a young pup, I was in the hospitality industry, and obviously if you want an award, they don't pick you. You have to make a submission into the awards people and tell how great you are. Like, even if you're a person, if you're the employee of the year, you have to make a submission. So it wasn't really surprising that the All Australian panel does the same thing. They just get the submissions and just pick a random 40 people out of that. That's how it works.
How many games do you reckon these selectors watch, Smatho, off the top of your head?
Well, I'm sure KO's been a big thing from this year, watching the little KO minis of the games from now on. So
I'm sure their KO accounts get an absolute hiding. I don't know. Willie Drew is a guy who's going to get a heap of run in the middle of the ground like he usually does.
So last week William Drew actually had a bit of a run with role against
Libba.
Libba. So not sure that will happen again, because I'm not sure that the Cats have that. Possibly Selwood, I suppose. He might just sit on Selwood all night and try and take his head off, which is not hard to do. But yeah, those last two scores will probably scare a few away. So if he goes back to just a regular role there, that could be a really good pick.
If he gets you an 80, it's probably a good result if he gets you an 80 here, Willem Drew. The other types around those prices aren't overly inspiring, so I don't mind you throwing Houston in the middle for that reason. Rosie, he's a ripper player, Rosie. It's hard to say no to him. I think you're going to have to you're going to end up with at least one of these 10,000 guys in your midfield and maybe a couple. So O'Connor's a guy that, well, on face value, you'd like to think you can throw in because he's got a lot of scores of that 8,000. But when he's playing back, I think the 8,000 is about right. So, yeah, really tough here, Smatho, because ideally I'd want to be spending up on Wines and Guthrie. And to a lesser extent, Boak. I'm pretty happy to fade Duncan.
All right, let me get Guthrie. I have to come down to O'Connor then. We'll have to be jammed in. That leaves me 9,000 average for the forwards. So the last time the Cats forwards went berserk. Obviously, we talked about Hawkins, Rowan, and Cameron kicking 12 against them. But surely this doesn't happen again. So who do we need to think about here, especially if we're running out of salary? Are we looking at key position players that could bob up and kick a score and get you to value? Or should we try and jam in some more midfielders that are now forward available as well?
I don't mind the Cats key position players because I've just got a little question mark still on the Port backs. Like Mackenzie's their fullback. Alir, excellent sort of third tall type, but not really the kind of guy that's going to stop him. Jonas is sort of the same. He doesn't really like taking the big matchups either. So, like Tom Hawkins, I think is definitely in play, and like Cameron as well. They both come off hundreds last time these two teams played, which we didn't see coming. But the more I look at that Port backline, there's no reason they can't outperform their salary again. Both of them only need to hit around that 80 mark to be a really good play. And if you do think the Cats are in the game, then there's your chance there. For Port, my favourite would be Butters at 11,000. He might be a little bit too expensive for your lineup here, Smatho, and a bit too expensive for mine if I want to be putting Wines and Guthrie in. But Butters, I think I can sort of overlook that last game against the Dogs. He can hit 8x pretty consistently at this price, Butters, and I think he's just sort of hitting his straps ready for this game to explode. So he's my favourite at the power. Dangerfield is pretty well priced too there if you can afford him at 13.9. This is the type of game that he's going to absolutely love. We talk about Port having very contested games. Well, he's your contested man for the Cats. It's a finals time. They're just going to have Dangerfield in there going absolutely berserk. So, yeah, we've got to find the cheap option somewhere, Smith. I'm not seeing it. Does that mean we go Sam Mays for a sub-miracle? 5,000. Few people tried it last week. If you follow you on Twitter, they even pulled out the Ruck donut, which just seems a bit overboard. But Sam Mays at 5,000, I think it's definitely in play for a small percentage of your lineups on this slate.
Yeah, if that goes in, therefore you can pretty much pick. Oh, I can't get the Dangerfield, but you can shuffle around, gets paid more in your mids there. But you could be relying on a couple of these kind of cheap Cats guys here. Like I was going to ask you about Simpson. Sorry, Simpson. He's only just came in the last couple of weeks. What kind of role he's been playing?
Well, he's been more up forward. He's known the half forward flank. I think if you look at the team though, with Dangerfield, he's going to be on the ball. They've got Duncan named in the middle. They got Selwood. They got Dangerfield. They've got Smith and Menegola running the wings. On the bench, they've named Parfitt. They've named Guthrie. So I think there's enough midfielders in the team that Simpson probably won't get too much of a run in there. And I think it's all about role with him when they're down a midfielder and Simpson can sort of get into that midfield mix, then 8,000's a pretty good price for him. But when he's stuck on a half-forward flank, I don't think he's a terrible play, but I'm not seeing the upside that we can see from him on occasions.
And then obviously Brad Close, Luke Dowhouse, they all need things to go their way. Look, that's going to be popular. Dowhouse with a 62 and an 81 as well. So you might want to try and get away with these kind of plays if people are going to go this build that we're making here. So
I don't mind Dowhouse. I don't mind Rowan. bit more so than close. I think obviously Rowan, well, you talk about having upside. He hasn't done anything, and since that big 100 against Port, Dalehouse has bobbed up at times this year. They're all quite high risk, high reward options, but that's sort of what we're dealing with if we're trying to find a couple of cheap guys on this slate.
Yeah, the last player I want to talk about. The last player I want to talk about is obviously Todd Marshall, who's going to be the cheapest forward here. Those scores are not too bad. 68. So obviously Georgiades is out. So obviously that's one less forward to think about. Dick Clunk, 8 marks, 2 tackles, 68 against the Bulldogs. So if you think that Port Adelaide's going to win this game and win this game well, obviously you'll need some goals out of Toddy Marshall. So that could give you some more leverage in terms of your second forward there. But look, I think as you've been suggesting that you like the Cats here, you're not sure about the Port defence. So let's click on a couple of blokes that I might like. Dalehouse and I can't get the camera in there. If I go roll and I still can't get the camera. So
we're in trouble here, Smatho. I think what you say there is it's a pretty good point that if you sort of want to link these forwards up with who you think is going to win the game and just sort of match it up with the rest of your team, if you're leaning on a Port heavy lineup, you probably want to complement it with a couple of at least one Port forward, and then the same with Geelong. If you are looking for Geelong to win like they did earlier in the season, then they're going to get the points from the Geelong forwards. So on these really tough slates where there's not a lot of obvious value, I think there's definitely a lot more merit in thinking about your sort of game scripts and what you think might happen in the game and building the lineups around that rather than totally relying on picking the guys with the right prices.
Excellent. All right. So that is the preview for the Port Adelaide Power and Geelong Cats for Friday night, the qualifying Friday. We'll be back, obviously, next Thursday evening with one of the semi-finals. Hopefully, it'll probably be one of the Cats or Port Power hosting this particular game. So we're going to be back talking about that as well. Make sure you give us a like on Facebook or on YouTube as you finish up the program for this evening. All right, Hef, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for all your insights.
No worries, 90,000. Go out there and get after it.
Excellent. And we'll congratulate to all our winners who get on the Draftstars leaderboard. So thanks for joining on the stream. Thanks for the show. And we'll catch you next week on the DFS Down Under show. See you later.
Thanks, mate.
See ya.